Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Richard Rhett, founder and CEO of Sierra Madre, and if you're just joining us, we're doing a video series on cooler weather camping or winter camping. Now, if you're just tuning in to this video, be sure and go back to the first video. You'll want to see some of the basics that we talked about with nutrition and base layering with your clothing. So make sure you go back and hit those points so that you can catch up and get to where we are today. Today, we're talking about some of the common mistakes that we see that people struggle with when they're getting into cold weather camping. We're going to talk about 5 different things. So if you've ever struggled with staying warm out in the wild, you're going to want to pay attention to this. You might learn something. So one of the first mistakes that we see quite often is skimping on your gear, either to save weight or to save money. Now I get it, there's always a balance, but if you're going out into the wild and it's cooler, you really want to consider getting some high quality gear and making some plans and understanding kind of where you're going. So the first thing I'll talk about is high quality gear. You know, the reason that's important is you don't want to be thinking about whether your gear is going to make it or not. You really want to be able to trust your gear, rely on it, and push yourself through those tougher days with high quality gear. That's going to make a big difference. The next thing you really want to consider is what gear to take. Sometimes you need to really look at the route that you're taking and try and understand and gain as much information as possible on when you're exposed to the elements more. For instance, if you were to start a trail at, let's say, 1,000 feet, and then you knew on day 2 or day 1 you would be camping at about 2,500 or 3,000 feet, the temperature variation there could be up to 20 degrees. And look, you want to give yourself a buffer. You might see a forecasted temperature range, but then the environment changes and a storm moves through. You're going to need to have a buffer. So give yourself a 10, 15 degree buffer so that you can make sure you're protected from an insulation standpoint and staying warm. Okay, now that we've gone over that, I want to talk about mistake number 2, and that's selecting the right gear for the right job. Now, sometimes you really can change the outcome of an adventure by just having the right gear. So let's talk about that. I'll focus on insulation first. Synthetic versus down, and then comfort ratings versus survival ratings. Come on over here, let's take a look at something. Now this is my air camp setup, and what I'm using right here is a down 0 degree system. Now, down has a lot of options, honestly, and it can get quite confusing. Down can come in a natural fill where it's literally the right off the bird, if you will. You can also have a coating on the down the fill, and that coating will actually help with water resistivity. That's important, and I'll tell you why. The biggest difference between down and synthetic is synthetic's ability to not absorb water. Well, why is that important? When you're sleeping, you're going to emit some form of condensation, sweat. You might be cold, but your body is still radiating a small amount of moisture, and that moisture has to escape. Now, if you're using a regular down fill, that moisture could get trapped in the down fibers. With down, waterproof down, which is what this is, or water resistant down, it will actually pass through those down fibers and escape out of the breathable nylon or polyester. Synthetic fibers don't absorb any water, and so when you're in a really wet conditioned environment and it's cold, you're definitely going to want to consider if you are able to take a synthetic option for insulation. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the ratings, comfort rating versus survival rating. Now this is, like I said, this is a down 0 degree top quilt, and this is a 0 degree comfort rating. You can see I've got about 3.5, 4 inches of insulation there. It's very thick, and that insulation is what's going to be the thing that is actually retaining your heat. So you're not keeping the cold out as much as you are retaining your heat and holding your heat in. On our products, we use a comfort rating. Some people use survival ratings. Now, a 0 degree in survival rating would have a lot less down fill or a thinner amount of insulation. And so you really want to understand which rating you're looking at when you're looking at cold weather insulation. It's very important because if you're using a 0 degree survival bag, you're going to be pretty miserable if you get down around 0 degrees. Using a 0 degree comfort bag, you should be perfect all the way down to 0 degrees. Now that's going to vary a little bit per person. Some people are generally more cold, more susceptible to the cold. Some people sleep a little hotter. I am definitely a hotter sleeper than my wife. My wife loves having like a -10 bag when she's down into the zeros, whereas I could probably sleep with a 10 degree bag down to 0. So it just depends. There's a little variation there. I would always err a little bit on the safe side. Like I said earlier, always give yourself a buffer. All right, well that's a good overview of down versus synthetic and comfort rating versus survival rating. The next thing I want to talk about in having the right gear for the job is how you insulate your backside. Now, when you're in a hammock, the important thing to consider is having insulation literally on the outside of the hammock. Now, a big mistake that we see people make quite regularly is using a normal sleeping bag with their hammock and trying to go out and do cold weather camping. Now, cold weather camping, it could get miserable that way in 60 degree weather. So this is really important. If you're getting into hammock camping or you would like to start hammock camping when it's a little cooler, you want to make sure you use either a pad in your hammock or you have insulation on the outside of your hammock. And the reason that's important, if you're in a sleeping bag and you get in the hammock, you're going to compress your insulation and it's not going to keep you warm. Remember, loft is what's going to retain your heat. And if you're compressing that loft, then it has no ability to retain your heat and your backside is going to freeze. There's no doubt. So an underquilt is a great way to keep your heat in on the backside in the hammock. Let's talk a little bit about ground camping and what you need to look for when you're doing that. Come on over here, I've got a tent set up and I want to go over a few things with you in regards to choosing a pad. Now, when you're choosing a pad, selecting the right pad for the job is very important. I really don't camp on the ground all that much anymore, but I've still got all of my pads from back in the day. And this is something that's really important. If you're going into colder weather, you're going to stay a bit warmer because you have the ground as an insulator, right? In the air, wind can blow in and cool you down pretty rapidly. But there's only so much insulating the ground's going to do. Eventually, it's going to pull heat out of your body. So what you're going to want is an insulated pad. Now, here's an example between an insulated pad and a non-insulated pad. You can see that this is just basically an air chamber. There's no insulation there. It's just two pieces of fabric. You'll put air in. That'll make it comfortable. But once you're out of warm weather camping, that's going to get cold. This is one of my insulated pads, and you can see I've patched this thing up so many times. This is something you got to consider when you're on the ground. If your pad loses air, you're going to be quite uncomfortable. But this actually has synthetic fibers on the inside of the pad to help give you a little more R value. Now, pads use R value to determine the heat retaining capabilities, whereas loft would be what you would use on like a synthetic or a down sleeping bag. So the R value is very important. This is a combination of synthetic fibers and air. That's going to do a great job when you're out cold weather camping. The other thing you can use is a closed cell plus air pad. So this actually has closed cell foam inside, but then you can also blow it up to get a little more thickness. And then lastly, we've got a closed cell pad with reflective on the outside. This is a really popular pad. I would never suggest going cold weather camping with just this, but this is a great addition to, say, a closed cell air, or even just an air, depending on the temperature range. You can make this work by helping block that heat the cold ground sucking the heat out of you. This will really help if you don't have an insulating pad. So I would use this, and it'll be quite comfortable that way. So those are very important, and that's really the things you want to consider that most people don't think about when they're going camping. You know, if you're on the ground, you really got to think about the pad that you're using. Pay attention to what its R value is. If you're going to sleep in the air, you're going to want to think about getting an underquilt. That's going to keep you warm on your backside so that you don't freeze and that wind suck the heat right out of you. The next most common mistake we see, number 4, is poor ventilation. Now this can really be a problem. In a tent, when you're in the wild, your tendency may be to want to really close it off and keep all of the wind out. And I get that because, you know, wind is cold, comes in, it'll suck heat out. But the reality is your body releases about a gallon of water every night, which is insane, right? You wouldn't think that, but your breath, your body is producing lots of water. It's extruding lots of water. And so you're really going to want to make sure that you have some ventilation. Now this is more of a 3-season tent, but it's just an example to show you. You're going to want to have a vent up here at the top on both sides if you can to have cool air or wind circulate through the tent. It's very important because what's going to happen if you don't, then you're going to have a lot of condensation form on the wall of the tent, and either that's going to turn to ice or it's going to be trapping water inside. And so you're going to want to vent and make sure you have some airflow entering and exiting the tent. Now that's also very important when it comes to air camping. Let me show you what we've done here. And on some products you'll see that you'll have vents at the top. Now these vents help allow air to flow through and circulate and get air moving. You've also got obviously much more open space so that air can flow in and remove some of that condensation while you're in the product. The other thing that people will use a lot in the wintertime with hammocks is a winter sock or a winter top shield. Now those both help block heat. They both help block wind and retain heat, but the big problem again is condensation. So anytime you're air camping or tent camping, pay close attention to venting. You really want to make sure you've thought through, okay, I'm going to have some airflow through here, and that's going to help reduce condensation and ultimately keep you warmer. Now, the 5th mistake, and honestly, if you cold weather camp, this is probably, if you're like me, this is one of the easiest ones to forget. It's considering your environment, considering the place that you're going to set up. Now, if you're tent camping or hammock camping, this will ring true. You've always got to think about, am I close to water? Am I high in elevation? Like right now, we're up on a ridge. And so if there was wind blowing through here, we would be very exposed to cold weather and getting colder faster. What you can do is you can find areas where maybe you have a tree line, or maybe you use part of the earth to help block some of that wind and create a shield for your shelter. The other thing you want to consider if you're close to water, now water with wind blowing over it, that's an air conditioner basically. You really want to stay clear of getting too close to water or a body of water so that you're not getting that cold air effect that happens when wind blows over it. The other thing to think about is when you make a fire, now you don't want to get too close to your gear with your fire, but when you make a fire, if you're in kind of an environment that encases you, that hot air will circulate in your camp and help keep you warmer. Well, look, I hope that is encouraging, and maybe that shows you a few tricks that you haven't used before. But if you're doing all that, even still, the reality is it's possible for you to end up getting cold. It's just thermodynamics, really. No matter how much you do or how much insulation you have, there's still a possibility for things to go the wrong way and you to end up getting cold and miserable. Now in the next video, we're going to show you a few hacks that you can use to stay warm. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. They're going to be very helpful in adding heat back into your thermal equation. So if you ever experienced cold weather camping or you got a war story that you want to share with everybody, drop it in the comments below. And if you have any questions, be sure to put those down there as well. Look, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.